Hi, good Erev Shabbos, Erev Shabbat Shalom, Erev Shabbat Parshat Tzav, Erev Shabbat Hagadol, and one day away from Erev Pesach. The Torah says Jews went out of Egypt in haste, and everybody's under a lot of pressure this week because you have to prepare for at least 2, that's for us in Israel, or 3 days in the diaspora. So I'll keep this short. I'd like to talk about slavery. And what it means to leave it. And I'd like to do that by resorting to an observation of my master and teacher, Rav Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. I'm not sure that I remember right now where he said these things, although it's probably in Time of Our Freedom or in the Haggadah that was put out under his name, but this is a comment that he made on more than one occasion. In Halakha, there is this conception that the slave relates to his master and relates to his servitude in 2 different ways. On the one hand, he belongs to the master. The master he is not a master, he does not own his own destiny. He can't decide when he gets up and when he lies down and when he goes to work and when he doesn't go to work. And even though the Torah worked very hard to humanize servitude in a world in which there was no economic sustainability without it, and by the way, there is no positive religious injunction to own slaves. If you have slaves, you have to treat them humanely and so on and so forth. That's one part of servitude. But there's another part of servitude, and that's spiritual servitude. A slave, the personality of the slave and the personality of the free person are totally different. A slave has no sense of time. All of life is one big, long drudgery. He has no hope, because unless somebody gets him out, unless somebody liberates him, or her, he is stuck where he is. He can't think on his own because he has to always align himself to whatever his master says. He's afraid. The slave is always afraid, either of beatings or of displeasing the master, and as a result, he's going to be more concerned not about what he thinks, but what the others think. And he's going to try very hard not to stand out. That form of psychologically and spiritual slavery, a life without hope and a life without light, is expressed in a uniquely Jewish or uniquely halachic idea, and that is that the master controls the slave not only through owning him, but also what's called a kinyan isur, that his entire personality, his entire ritual status, is affected by being a slave. And as a result, when one frees a slave, one actually has to do 2 things. One has to give him a piece of paper that says, "Here, I'm freeing you," and that takes away which the master says, "I no longer have any ownership of you in terms of money." And the second one is the slave goes to mikveh, because a Jewish slave, a non-Jew who has become enslaved to a Jew, when he's freed, becomes Jewish. He goes to a mikveh because he becomes reborn. He becomes reborn because his personality is transformed, because now he is encouraged to think on his own. He participates in a larger family of Jewish hope and Jewish expectations, and the discussion and he learns Torah, and he participates in the Torah dialogue that goes back so many generations and goes forward so many generations. There are, in fact, very famous converts throughout the ages, throughout the Middle Ages, into the modern world, where they took their place next to the great sages of the Masorah, of our tradition. But it starts by the fact that the slave, who up until now has not had hope and not had sense of time, and is afraid to speak on his own, and so on and so forth, and has no perception of truth. Truth is whatever the master dictates. Similarly, when he's redeemed, when his soul is redeemed from being enslaved, he becomes transformed into a totally different persona. That's probably the reason why Pesach is connected to Shavuot, because while we were while we were liberated from Egypt physically, politically, we required the transformative moment of the giving of the Torah to have our, and there was immersion that was part of that, to have our personalities transformed. Now, it didn't always work. I mean, we know what kind of slave personality the Israelites exhibited throughout the ages. That's true, but over time, one does overcome it. It takes time. Everything is gradual. I was thinking about this specific insight of Rav Soloveitchik regarding the opening line of the Haggadah. The Haggadah says, "Hashata avdei l'shana haba b'nei chorin." Now we are slaves. Next year will we be free men? Now we're not slaves. We're truly not slaves. What kind of slaves? We go around, we run around. All right, Corona has restricted our actions, but that doesn't mean that we're slaves. So what does the Haggadah mean? So I think one possibility is exactly this: we may be politically free, but all too often we are still slaves. Slaves not in the political or the monetary sense, but slaves in terms of our enslavement to fashion, our enslavement to society, in the sense that we always feel that we have to adjust our thinking to what other people say. We're enslaved to not finding ourselves able to speak our own minds or to speak up against things that we think are wrong or that need to be changed. That's also slavery, and that's a harder slavery to get past, because it's not just something you have to bear physically in terms of work. It's something that you have to bear spiritually and psychologically in terms of standing up for yourself. Hashata avde l'shana haba b'nei chorin. On Pesach, we should actually, in the world of social media, it's my favorite bugaboo, in the world of social media, it's really, really hard, because if you say something that is not acceptable by other people, you will be beaten down just like a slave. You have to get with the program. The slave is the one who has no personality. The free man is the person who has their own opinion. It's just like that line, for famous scene in Monty Python's Life of Brian, where Brian says, "You're all individuals," and everybody says, "We're all individuals," and one guy says, "I'm not. We need to be that I'm not." That's true. That's freedom. Freedom. No, freedom. That doesn't mean that every idea that everybody comes up with is proper. So therefore, the Torah, we have the process of going from Egypt to Sinai and accepting the Torah, within which there's a vast spread and spectrum of ideas and approaches and ways to truth that the Torah provides. I think that's in fact what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says. It's actually not Pirkei Avot. It's actually in the addition to Pirkei Avot. And lechaben chorin elamisha lomed Torah. The only true person is a person who learns Torah, because then you can pull yourself out of the servitude of broader society and go to a higher level of humanity and a higher level of service of God. So the process of the Seder is a process. Hashata avdei l'shana haba b'nei chorin. So as we work through the Seder, knowing free well that we are monetarily not slaves and politically not slaves, but that we have to work on getting past the kinyan isur of slavery, the slave mentality, which is imposed upon us by all kinds of different forces in our society. So that the Seder will start a process of not only recounting what happened, but of also working on our inside, doing the inside hard work to be able to truly become free. It's not a coincidence that one of the aspects of Pesach, which is not particularly emphasized, is the fact that Pesach is a Yom Hadin. Pesach is the day of judgment. It's the day upon which the tefuah, the grains are judged. It's one of the reasons why there's Yizkor on the last day. So this element of sort of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur type of atmosphere is very much a part of Pesach, so that we liberate ourselves politically. We appreciate our political liberation. We relive periods that were harder, in which Pesach was a real contrast to what life was really like when the Jews were living in the Melech and the ghetto of Morocco or in the ghettos of Frankfurt or in the pile of settlement, but also working on freeing ourselves from a slave mentality, from a herd mentality, so that and realizing that that's the kind of liberation that we really need to work on and which we will achieve, hopefully, as we move closer to Shavuot. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. We'll see you next time.